Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Nazarik was in high school DxD? Russian Reversal wrote this amazing story. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. This is just a nightmare. Mamanga exhaled sadly as he brought Issei's mother back to her bed. Miki, or so he had managed to hear during her fight with her husband. So Miki Hayadu. This has gone completely off plan. Of course, Mamanga wanted to introduce himself as Issei's older brother. However, what happened back there was not how he planned to do it at all. He wanted, if it worked, to introduce himself as some distant relative of the Hayadu family, telling them that he had come to find his relatives. Something like a third cousin or even further, then try to convince Issei's parents to let him stay with them for a few days, using his friendship with Issei as a reason. And if that didn't work, use control amnesia on Issei's parents, convincing them that they had recently arranged for Mamanga to come and stay with them for a few days until he could find a suitable house for himself. After all, he didn't want to upset Issei's parents and didn't plan on enjoying their hospitality for long. He was planning on finding some simple job and getting one legally once he figured out exactly what documents he needed to have with him in this world and how he could get a work permit. However, in the end, his first encounter with Issei's parents turned into a complete disaster. Pandora's actor. Mamanga cast an angry glance toward the front door, as if to glare at the Pandora's actor beyond the door as he placed Miki on the bed. She looked uncomfortable with her wet clothes, but Mamanga couldn't undress her. He was embarrassed enough thinking of such actions, before his emotions and anger were forcibly extinguished, and he could balance his emotions again. No, it's stupid to be angry at Pandora's actor when he only acted according to my own orders and was created by myself. If there's one person in the world I should be mad at, it's myself for creating him as such. And for not telling him my plan right away, relying on the possibility that Pandora's actor would be able to guess my thoughts simply because he was made by me. Besides, reasoning logically, Pandora's actor did exactly what I wanted him to do, and did it all in the best way. Goru was simply an unintended collateral. Well, he's now in a better place. I think that Pandora's actor shouldn't have trouble following such a simple order. Living a full life without any worry should be recompense enough, right? Mamanga shook his head, clearing his mind, putting Goru's fate out of his mind. It's not like as his illegitimate child, he should interact much with him. Pandora's actor was able to put together a realistic and self-explanatory explanation on the fly, saying that I am Goru's illegitimate son. I have drawn parallels for myself with Goru before, but now I don't even know what to think about having illegitimate children. I'm not even married, let alone have children, so how would I have illegitimate ones? God, I'm still a virgin. What am I even thinking about? Mamanga shook his head, then looked at Miki again at her calm expression, thanks to magic no longer distorted by pain or sadness, as surely her sleep would be altered if she fell asleep in the usual way. If she could fall asleep at all after having her life turned upside down. Okay, what's done is done. I gave orders to actor to take care of Goru, so he's no longer a problem and send him somewhere else. Hell, maybe I should have sent the money with him, otherwise he'll have trouble surviving in Neo-Tokyo or somewhere else. Or, is there a Neo-Tokyo in this world? Maybe it's just Tokyo for now? Things shouldn't be as bad as in the future, right? Mamanga dismissed these thoughts after a short nod. Okay, I think Goru can handle it, he still has his job and savings after all. I'm sorry, Goru, I didn't mean for it to turn out this way. I really apologize. But anyway, Pandora's actor has created a good cover for me, even if not what I originally intended. Mamanga raised his hand, then scratched his chin. A child out of wedlock is a simple, believable story, plus if my supposed mother is really dead, then that takes away Miki's ability to verify the information, since she clearly has no resurrection spells, hopefully. This can also serve as a fairly simple but strong and realistic shield against many questions, explaining why I suddenly appeared in this town without any knowledge about it or money. All without any prior information about my appearance, and why no one even suspected my existence until I arrived in town. Mamanga tilted his head, then sighed. Okay, Pandora's actor did accomplish what I wanted very well, if not in the way I originally intended. So, the only one I can be offended or angry with what happened, is myself. Somewhere downstairs, a door opened with a slight creak, then closed, and Mamanga could hear someone making their way to the stairs, quickly going upstairs and ending up next to the door leading to Issei's parents' room. Or well, now it was just Miki's room now. A moment later the door opened and out of the dark corridor, completely unobstructed to him due to Mamanga's racial skill, dark vision, appeared the figure of a young boy with brown eyes and brown short ungroomed hair. Pandora's actor, finding Momonga's gaze, only nodded silently to him, conveying the information that Goru had been ferried somewhere away, somewhere where he couldn't obstruct Momonga. Ha, so at least that's been dealt with. Momonga nodded back, then cast one last look at Mickey. The middle-aged woman was not young, you could tell that from one look at her, but she was perfectly preserved for her years. Momonga thinks that she was about the same age as his real age, maybe even a little younger. And she looked really good. Maybe it's because she lives in this world where the ecology hasn't been so badly destroyed yet? Momonga looked up to the window, looking out through that into the night sky, practically empty except for a few bright stars and the moon, unlike his old world, where such a view is completely obstructed by pollution. She's probably never been exposed to acid rain, or is she just taking care of herself? Maybe genetic modification? No, I don't think they use them so massively yet, like cybernetic implants. Maybe it's simply heredity? Momonga thought for a second, then looked away from the peacefully sleeping woman and made his way to the first floor, Pandora's actor following silently behind him. Miki Hayudu slowly opened her eyes, then stretched out, yawning heavily, trying to figure out why exactly she felt so uncomfortable at this moment, covered in sweat. What happened? Miki tried to remember if Goru had decided yesterday to repeat their sex escapades, which they had entertained in the past, and whose numbers had invariably begun to dwindle as Issei grew older and they got older. Checking herself over, she didn't feel the expected soreness, instead feeling overall tired. No, I guess not. Miki ran her hand beside her, trying to find Goru, but feeling nothing but the blankets, which made her situation even weirder. Why would she sleep over the blanket? In fact, the bed looked like it was still made, which meant that she had fallen asleep over the blanket with her sweaty, clammy clothes, and she could still feel the sweat-wet fabric sticking to her. Miki frowned, looking over the sweaty clothes. She was wearing her favorite cream blouse, along with a dark brown skirt, clothes that she would never wear to sleep. Why am I dressed and sleeping so strangely? Miki's question burst through her cloudy mind, before a whirlwind of memories and images pierced into her mind, stripped of the saving cloak of sleep. All at once, the memory about Goru's infidelity, the appearance of Satoru Suzuki who looked so similar to Issei, the fight, the blow from Goru, then the crying and the last confusion along with the painful thoughts. About how Satoru held her in his arms, said something, and then how she had lost consciousness in the stranger's arms. And then she woke up here in her bed alone. A sob fitted from her chest a moment later, followed by a second and a third. Miki could only raise her hands to her face, trying to press those to her eyes, as if to dam the shed tears coming out against her will. The shivers that ran through her whole body, however, prevented her from doing so, so without holding back, Miki burst into tears, trying to muffle her loud sobs. 20 years of marriage. 20 entire years she'd spent married to Goru. Everything from romantic dates under the shade of a sakura tree, to hot sex in a love hotel, from meeting her parents to crazy trips with friends to the sea in the middle of the work week. For 20 years they had lived, hiding nothing from each other, sharing the most intimate, expensive and shameful things. She remembered the time when they barely had enough to rent a small room, and when they bought a house together, they had been together all this time. 20 long years, time they had spent together sharing everything, and in the end, Miki didn't know whether she should have burst into tears at Goru's betrayal, or laughed at how, in retrospect, she could have been so blind. Goru had never concealed his foolish adolescent ambition to gather a harem. Heck, he was even worse than Issei in high school. Which says something. Miki should have realized at once that such a man could not be a good husband. But she fell in love with Goru like a fool. She had believed all his promises to be a model family man, to abandon his old habits, to become a responsible adult. Only to be betrayed. She could only laugh at how short-sighted she was, but now before her eyes was the confirmation. A trip to Kyoto, a pilgrimage to the temples for the birth of a child. Isn't she a fool? How could she see all the humble young man, looking for the last member of his family that had abandoned him, and still close her eyes? To believe Goru no matter what? Now before her eyes was only one, but the most important confirmation of his infidelity, his son by another woman. How many other sons did Goru have? How many more trips did he use as an excuse for his infidelity? Were the business trips, visiting his mother in the village, corporate holidays, actually just that? And how many more she didn't know about? Miki couldn't help herself but to continue crying, sobbing out loud, unable to even move out of her seat and pull off her sweaty, sticky clothes. Miki felt dirty, the feeling of betrayal, treachery, overwhelming her. Miki didn't even know if she was actually awake and was not just having a bad dream. If she was, she wanted to wake up from this nightmare. but the clothes clinging to her body, and the clarity of her thoughts, told Mickey that she was awake. Mickey lifted her fingers, then dug one into her other hand, hissing a moment later as she felt the pain. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a dream, it was a nightmare, one that she has to live through. Mickey lifted her head, looking at the clock hanging in front of her bed, and it was very late in the day already. She always woke up a little earlier than everyone else. She would make breakfast for her husband and son, saw them off to work and school. And as the clock in front of her told her, she was already a little late with her usual routine. It was 6:45 in the morning. Yet Mickey could not find it in herself to get out of bed, even to move her hands and pull off her sticky clothes or wipe away her tears. Mickey just kept lying on the bed, looking up at the ceiling as if trying to find signs on it, an answer of exactly what she was supposed to do with herself now that her whole life had collapsed overnight. But the ceiling was silent, leaving Mickey lying there alone with no answer. Minute after minute passed, but Mickey could not get her thoughts together, before the natural needs of her body forced her to slowly get up. That is, unless she wanted to continue lying not only in sweat and dried tears that stung her skin unpleasantly, but in something even more physiological and disgusting. Slowly Mickey lifted one arm, then the other, and bending those, lifted herself above her bed before exhaling. The events of yesterday were still swirling around in her mind, but she had no way to form a coherent picture. She remembered Issei returning, the shocking news, Goru's punch, the pain, and the slight metallic taste in her mouth, and in between one blink and the next she was in Satoru's hands. Then she tasted a light taste as if she were drinking fresh spring water, then the pain was gone, and she closed her eyes. She opened her eyes much later, lying in her bed with no idea what happened in the intervening hours. Well, at least now I know the threshold of news before I would pass out. What a bad joke. Mickey sighed, defeatedly, not that anyone could blame her after such information surfaced. Right, shouldn't there be some pain and swelling? Mickey felt her eyes fill with tears again after she remembered Goru's punch, as she lifted her hand, groping her face to check for any swelling, only to find one devoid of any damage whatsoever. Was I actually dreaming all that? How I wish it were so. Mickey took a step toward the door of her bedroom, her legs still slightly wobbly. No, I remember the pain and the blood. But where did it all go? Is my nose still broken? Touching her face again, Mickey noted that her nose was just as usual. Or not. I don't know what's real and what's not anymore. After making her way through slowly, Mickey opened the door, after which she smelt an incredible smell coming from the kitchen that made her bladder retreat for a moment and her stomach rumble piercingly. She couldn't eat anything last night, worrying about Issei not returning for so long after school, and after that, her appetite was the last thing on her mind, suddenly falling asleep or not. Mickey made her way to the bathroom before closing the door and dumping her clothes in the laundry basket, and she stepped into the shower as if trying to wash herself of everything that had happened yesterday. Minute after minute, Mickey desperately tried to wipe off all the dirt that she couldn't stop feeling on her body. Before finally giving up after washing her hair and brushing her teeth a third time, and feeling a little better but still not fully clean, she got out of the shower, quickly putting on a change of clothes. After her shower, the clock showed a little after 7. Usually by this time, Goru and Issei would start waking up, then spend 10 or 20 minutes cleaning up, and then they would go down to breakfast, gathering around the same table as a family. Thoughts of Goru caused pain to bloom from within Mickey and at the same time resentment and anger. She wondered if he had ever laughed at the way Mickey was busying herself in the kitchen, unaware of what he was doing behind her back. Maybe he even compared Mickey to the others? And what place did she deserve on his list? Probably somewhere high, since he chose to live with her. Or maybe he just couldn't afford to live with those who were really high on his list. Or maybe they didn't know about his true nature either. Mickey wished she could stop thinking about it, but she couldn't, and she would be happy to take any opportunity to distract herself. So, when her stomach protested again, remembering the great smell from the kitchen, she took control of herself and after putting on her homely yukata, walked down the steps to the first floor. As she approached the kitchen, the smells became more and more appealing, and as she entered the kitchen, Mickey's eyes blurred at the sight of the table. She could recognize the rice and soy sauce pork by sight, alongside the eel sashimi and mushroom tempura. But most of the dishes on the table seemed unfamiliar to Mickey. Meat, rice, slathered with sauces she'd never seen in the past. And each of the dishes literally shone, as if prepared for the presentation of a new ultra-expensive 3-Michelin restaurant in Tokyo. It was as if each of these dishes were the trump card of such an establishment that rich people would pay millions for. Mickey swallowed the saliva that almost ran down her chin before finding the man who had turned her life through no fault of his own, Satoru, who was in the kitchen preparing the incredible food. As soon as Satoru noticed her, he instantly bowed deeply. "Mickey, I would like to apologize for what happened yesterday and I've cooked breakfast," Satoru said softly, maintaining perfect posture even as he bowed before rising. "I have no money to repay for the opportunity to be here, but I am ready to start working as soon as I, get to know the city. Until then, I hope I can repay you with these this simple meal." Mickey froze, feeling her already damaged psyche seek to break free of her control again. "No money, haha. Then tell me how you bought all this. Heck, even if you are secretly a world-class chef. Where the hell did you get those groceries? Where did you find the cooking utensils? I don't think you'd even have time for that while I was asleep." "Wait, what did he say?" Mickey lowered her eyes as Satoru's words struck a chord with her. "He didn't say he had no money. He said he had no money to repay for the opportunity to be here, and an apology for yesterday. He really sees what happened yesterday as his fault, as if he was to blame for Goru's infidelity and the fight that followed. And this is all after his mother died, maybe just a week or less ago. Ha, don't tell me he spent all his money to make this breakfast trying to apologize to me for something that wasn't even his fault." Mickey felt her heart ache again, but it wasn't for Goru, it was about the young man in front of her, the realization of how good a man he really was, and how much he must have suffered. He had only come to Goru only after he was left without his mother's care, after which he tried to leave when he realized that he had not caused the reaction he had hoped for. And even though it was not his fault, he still tried to apologize, probably after having spent ungodly amounts of money, and even with the inheritance he received from his mother. No, wait, he isn't yet of legal age. How could he even get here as a minor all the way from Kyoto? Mickey thought about it for a second before deciding not to get involved in Satoru's personal life, at least now, while they were still practically strangers to each other, and while she was in this state. "You shouldn't have." Mickey tried to tell Satoru that he shouldn't have felt bad about what happened yesterday, but he instantly interrupted her words. "No, Mickey, I should." Satoru exhaled, feeling bad enough by the looks of him, but still keeping himself under control. "I am the cause of what happened yesterday, and you are a fine woman who agreed to shelter me despite everything that happened. I even feel bad about providing you only such only food and nothing else. So please just try, it may not be much, but with your in your condition, I'm sure this food will give you a meaningful buff. Give you strength." Faced with Satoru's insistence, and still exhausted from yesterday's events, Mickey found no strength or ability to resist his words, so after making her way to the small table to her seat, she sat down and then looked around. She noticed that Isekai was nowhere to be found, and that Satoru wasn't going to eat, continuing to stand. "You're not going to eat? And Issei? Where is he?" "We have already eaten," Satoru replied calmly, after which Mickey shifted her gaze to the sink, where the dishes she usually accumulated, which she washed for each member of the family, and found it to be empty of dirty dishes. And following her gaze, Satoru immediately added, "Omo, I already washed the dishes." Hearing this, Mickey shifted her gaze back to the dishes in front of her. All of them are as fresh and incredible looking: meat, rice, mushrooms, the glazes. It all looked so incredible that Mickey did not even know if she had the right to destroy this beautiful composition with her actions. Somewhere inside her, Mickey was somewhat mad that her son wasn't with her right now, but Mickey quickly extinguished that thought and the flame of resentment inside. She shouldn't have thought that she was the only one who felt bad right now. For Issei also, his world had also collapsed yesterday, and it was only natural that he wanted to be alone. It was just strange to Mickey that now, in the kitchen, preparing to try some incredible restaurant dish, she was alone. No, she was not alone, she was together with Satoru. Even if she only knew him for the second day, he seemed to her to be a really kind, open, and reliable young man. Even if he appeared in this house at the same time as the tragedy. Mickey shook her head, she didn't want to think about that again, especially when she was trying to blame an innocent person of another's sin. She then quickly picked up her chopsticks and, deciding to try the sashimi first, took a small piece and put it in her mouth. A moment later, the tender eel literally melted in her mouth. The gentle and delicious taste caused Mickey to relax her shoulders, and somewhere inside her a small flame seemed to ignite, filling her body with strength. It's true what they say, a good breakfast can give you strength for the whole day. Almost unknowingly, Mickey reached for a second bite, then as she swallowed it, felt a smile blooming on her face. She hadn't smiled since the moment Issei had suddenly disappeared yesterday, not returning after school at the usual time, and after the debacle with Goru she only smiled now. There were only two reasons for this: either the food she was eating was magical and could strangely empower Mickey, and Mickey didn't believe that, even if the food tasted magical. Instead, she believed that the source of her happiness was the atmosphere of the table. The amount of care and sincerity coming from Satoru was almost palpable as she ate the incredible home-cooked meal that must have taken ages to prepare, the young man made for her. "Would you like to try the pork?" Satoru smiled, then moved the other dish a little closer to Mickey. Mickey, still unable to wipe the smile off her face, extended her chopsticks to the pork and took a small piece of artistically sliced pork into her mouth. Then she felt her thoughts gradually begin to clear. All her previous fears and doubts slowly began to recede into the background. And the reason for that was, "Thank you, Satoru," Mickey smiled slightly at the young man, "for your care." What Mickey had lacked all these years, but she hadn't even noticed it until now. Someone showed care for her, and it was not her son or husband, but a random man from the street. Well, not really strangers. Haha, her husband's son by his mistress. Mickey only smiled sadly at the thought before returning to her meal. "Omo, I see." Momonga watched as Mickey slowly devoured the food on the table as he looked at her parameters with life essence and mana essence. Mickey's parameters and characteristics were negligible, so she was the perfect candidate to experiment on, given that the low-level food Momonga pulled out of his inventory gave not a percentage buff, but a fixed one. Something like plus 200 to HP max. In other words, it was much more effective for low-level players whose HP might only be 100 or 200, but for high-level players it was useless garbage. Even throwing such items in the trash would not bother any of them. They would not bother to clutter their inventory with such low-level items. No one except Momonga himself, of course. Being a pathological collector, he kept an incredible stockpile of the most useless things in his inventory, not to mention Nazarik's treasure trove. Low-level food was one of the least bizarre things he kept in his inventory. And as you could tell due to her low stats, even slightly below the non-combatant first level of Yggdrasil classes, Mickey was the perfect specimen for a test. For one, Momonga could test whether the food from Nazarik and its buffs worked on the inhabitants of this world. Whether the people of the new world were affected by a dish if not eaten completely, which was impossible in the past in Yggdrasil, and how trying to eat several dishes at once worked. Unfortunately, only one food buff could be active at a time in Yggdrasil. Momonga had already tested this on himself, and these buffs behaved the same way as in the game. If he ate a new dish while the previous buffs were still active, the new buffs would replace the previous one. Furthermore, the buffs from the dish would not appear until he ate the dish in its entirety as in Yggdrasil, if now consuming even more time. The creatures of this world, however, behaved differently. As Momonga looked at Mickey's stats, Momonga could see two buffs stacking from two different dishes, and they both began to act instantly when Mickey first tasted the dish. Their effects, however, were reduced relative to the full effects. Momonga assumed that their effectiveness depended on how much of the total dish Mickey ate. In that case, the Yggdrasil dishes gave the creatures of this world much more tactical flexibility, but became much more restricted by how much they can stomach. Momonga needed to check exactly how much Mickey could eat. Could she eat two dishes at once and get two effects at once? And, when she ate a dish in portions, would the effect of that increase with each portion? But did the effect timer reset, or was Mickey limited? She had to take some time to dispense with the dish and get its full effect, and in doing so she lost buff time to eat the food? What if she ate two dishes of the same type? Would their effect double? Would the timer update? Would the buffs remain if you vomit out the food after eating it? Momonga saw so many potential experiments before him. Besides, he was really feeling guilty before Mickey, and so he apologized to her. Maybe the low-level consumables weren't much like Momonga's sincere remorse, but he wasn't willing to spend anything high-level on Mickey. And as it was, while the low-level consumables were practically worthless to Momonga, especially considering how many of them he had accumulated in his inventory in Nazarik, they were extremely tasty. This Momonga had determined on his own a little earlier, but here Momonga could have been wrong. His tongue was used to chemically treated water and food paste, so for him almost any food was incredibly tasty. But this one seemed to taste better than usual, so Momonga decided to share these dishes. Plus, it saved Mickey from having to cook food for today. And maybe for tomorrow as well? At the same time, Momonga would check to see if the food outside his inventory in this world would go bad, and if it would lose its flavor. However, Mickey, who glanced at him a few times, made Momonga stop his experimental planning for a moment before inwardly sighing. Of course, seeing someone just standing there watching you eat is uncomfortable. Maybe I should have gone somewhere then come back using Perfect unknowable? Okay, it's too late to fix this. I'll do that next time when I conduct these experiments. I'm sorry, Mickey, if I'm making you uncomfortable, Momonga apologized before grasping the excuse that came to his mind a moment later. I just don't know where I should be going right now. No need to apologize, I'm just very grateful for the food and concern. Mickey smiled slightly. Really? And as for what you should be doing? Mickey sighed a little. Don't you have to get ready for school? Momonga blinked. He certainly wanted to go to school, but education was very expensive in his home world. Even if it had been cheaper in the past, Momonga didn't think he could afford that without a single bill in his pocket. Sure, he could spend the gold or sell some of the items in his inventory, but that would be tantamount to announcing his connection to Yggdrasil. Anyone with any knowledge of it would instantly get information about Momonga and completely destroy his cover before he could get all the knowledge he needed. I'd be happy to, but... Momonga spread his hands as he tried his best to think of excuses in case the school here was affordable to all the people, and being that poor would be strange even for a teenager coming from out of town. I don't even know where it is. Ah yes, that's right. Mickey nodded slowly before setting the sticks away from herself. I really thank you for the food, Satoru. You're welcome, Mickey. Satoru shook his head. Mickey hadn't eaten a single dish to the end, and even the total came out to less than one full serving, so he couldn't really conclude his experiments. Is that her limitation? Appetite. Momonga held back the impulse to put a hand to his chin in a gesture of thoughtfulness. Or is she just lacking stomach volume? If you force-feed a person food, or maybe if the food is not in the stomach but only in the mouth or esophagus, will it give bonuses or... No, not the time to be thinking about it. Really, if you think about it that way, then I guess I need to work out your adoption if you want to, of course. A young man like you, no matter how mature you are, you still need a family. Mickey sighed and shook her head. That's right, adoption. Momonga nodded understandingly before he realized what Mickey was saying. Wait, what? Momonga froze, an expression of shock writ on his face as he looked at Mickey, pondering exactly what he should have done at the moment, and how very different the Earth of the past was from his own past world. In his past world, the practice of adoption and even orphanages still existed, but not until the age of 12. For at that age a child could well afford to work on the assembly line without additional problems, and thus be able to earn, provide for himself and pay the bills. Nobody wants to adopt a parasite. So orphanages function more like a cheap labor pool than a place for orphans to be adopted. And they were the lucky ones. Of course, there were certain age-related restrictions. After all, it was difficult for a child, unless he had inherited an apartment from his parents or had just been released from an orphanage, to find a place willing to rent them a room. As children were known to be forgetful and could easily set off a fire or similar disaster. Momonga saw dead orphans with a certain frequency and periodicity, and more than once had to go around certain neighborhoods because of the work of the cleaners. Especially during colder times or months of letting orphans out of their orphanages, but he was officially a year older than Issei, which meant he was already 17. He should be able to get a job easily in almost any job that didn't require connections or special education. Not that he wanted to work in an assembly line factory or as an office worker again, but for a few days at least. Enough time to make up his mind about how the world worked and how he should behave in society, that would have been enough. Adoption, on the other hand, was a very rare occurrence. Usually it was either when a rich person could not have children for some reason, which all the technology of his past world could not help, or ceremonially, in the case of adoption into one of the rich families, as a reward or with some purpose in mind. Last, and very rarely, by the kindness of a rich man who might take a fancy to a random orphan. Perhaps that was the point, though. Education in the past might have been extremely cheap, but only available to certain families or groups of people, and that's why Mickey wanted to adopt him, to give him the opportunity to learn. In Momonga's past world, anyone could get into a school if they had the money and met the minimum requirements of the institution itself. If in the past only certain groups of people could learn, Momonga might even be a little surprised that megacorporations did something relatively good in this world, where they made it possible for everyone to learn regardless of status, though with regard to their money. But no, Mickey had said a little earlier that he had to be in school, hadn't she? So he must have belonged to one of those families. Really, trying to pass himself off as a local in another world was really hard. Momonga thought about it for a moment, then decided to take a risk. Well, I have this. Whereupon Momonga pulled out from behind his back. To be exact, he created with Create Greater Item, a copy of the documents he had managed to study a little earlier, using Goru and Issei's documents as an example. Something like the ID card he had in his past world, only of a slightly different type. Of course, after replacing the important details with new ones that fit him. He'll try to show Mickey's documents, and if she starts asking questions that Momonga won't be able to answer, he could just wipe her memory using control amnesia, then head to the adoption process with her. If they don't use body chip implants at this time, then what marking will be made to indicate his adoption? If they're going to brand or something like that, Momonga will need to scrutinize that branding for the future, since just one use of create body could easily change his branding, taking away his credibility. In any case, reaching forward with the card to Mickey, Momonga paused for a moment. He wouldn't want to use a 10th tier spell like control amnesia. Right away, after yesterday he'd managed to put some simple wards on the area to protect himself from surveillance. But he decided to limit himself to the simpler and weaker wards, so as not to raise suspicion in any possible observer with the very strength of the wards. As a last resort, he would rather feed his opponent false information about his weakness and gain their scorn and underestimation than reveal his hand completely. Mickey, taking the card, immersed herself in reading it for a few seconds, before blinking and shifting her gaze to Momonga. Momonga, on the other hand, tensed inwardly as he looked at Mickey's strange expression. Is something wrong? These papers? They say you're of legal age, you have a driver's license. Why do you have one? Do you have a car? Mickey blinked in apparent confusion before exhaling slowly, while Momonga had already prepared to use charm species and control amnesia. Apparently, just copying Goru's papers, he forgot to delete some important details he didn't know about. And here I was wondering, how did you get here and about money? You are actually emancipated. Emancipated? The word pricked Momonga's memory a little, but that knowledge wasn't on the surface of his mind, and he didn't have time to dig into his memory right now. So he just nodded, hoping that it wasn't a trap. But, judging by Mickey's facial expression, it was an answer to her question, explaining if not all, then many questions at once. Yes, I am Mickey. Mickey raised her hand and put it to her face before looking away, an action that seemed suspicious to Momonga, but he allowed Mickey to act as he saw no intention to attack or do anything similar or unexpected. A great rarity indeed. I guess that explains a lot, how you got here, the money, your maturity. It is so rare that I never thought I would ever meet anyone emancipated even once in my whole life. Apparently what Mickey thought I did is possible, but is really an extremely rare event. Maybe it would have been better to just let her adopt me? Momonga thought about it but decided against it in the end. No, until I know the situation definitively, it's better to use as little high-rank magic as possible. The less magic used in creating my cover, the less likely I am to screw up on some little thing. I should try to adapt to this world. The more underestimated I am and the less my enemies are aware of my abilities, the better. Ahem, in that case, Mickey twirled Momonga's ID in her hands before returning them. I guess there's no point in me going anywhere with you right now, much less to school. But, maybe I should go with you after all? I think you'll soon realize that emancipated people are very rare, and it would be better if I could be present during your enrollment for school. At least it would be better for the principal. Absolutely, I would love to have you with me, Mickey, Momonga nodded. One more person, especially one who knows how the world works and who can guide him at the right moment, has always been a joy for Momonga. When it's available, discounting a trustworthy guide just because you want to go on an adventure is beyond foolish. And I think it's best for you to prepare to bring your emancipation documents with you when we go to school, just to make all progress smoothly. Actually, did you already bring all your stuff with you from Kyoto? Yesterday you came without your things. Did you move them overnight? Mickey stumbled as her memory of what happened yesterday was still raw. Crap, that's right, I forgot to fabricate some luggage. I guess it's a good that I had put Mickey to sleep. She would have asked some uncomfortable questions. Momonga, however, not showing his discomfort, only nodded. Then, after a slight momentary regret, did not dispel his ID documents, instead returning them to his inventory, foregoing their original function as a temporary item. He rather not risks crafting them again and miss some slight detail that would mark them out as fakes, especially now that he has to use them as his permanent personal documents. That's right, Mickey. Momonga simply agreed, not showing outwardly any of his thoughts. Things created with create greater item could exist for a long time as long as their existence was maintained by Momonga himself. The cost of maintaining them depended on the size, quality, quantity, and purpose of the items, plus, of course, the inability to create artifacts, magical weapons, food, or materials, anything that could be a resource. Instead, he could only create facsimiles of the item, albeit a high-quality one that would be immediately recognized as a fake, if he ever tried using it as a resource, disappearing as soon as Momonga wished it. Of course, given that his documents were essentially a page of paper, in Yggdrasil terms, Momonga could maintain the existence of his ID indefinitely. Still, albeit only a drop in a pool, such an act reduced Momonga's potential mana regeneration. It would last at least until he learned the look of his documents thoroughly and could reproduce them perfectly every time after. One more item on the quickly growing to-do list. Momonga sighed, then frowned. Now, a question: who has any idea what an emancipation resolution looks like? What even is an emancipation resolution? Issei made his way to the gates of Issei School before closing his eyes, drawing in the scent with his nose. Ah, mein Freund, indeed, it is the smell of purposelessness. Issei smiled, then crossed the small boundary separating the school grounds and the rest of the city. As he got closer, he could feel the sleepy and already awake minds of the students and adults around him begin to slowly spin, preparing for their daily drudgery. And through it all, the smell of directionlessness, of people simply existing rather than living, are thick in the air. Purposeless teachers, purposeless students, purposeless people, and even purposeless demons. What a contradiction in terms. Issei even began counting the demons, sensing their presence around him. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, there's a whole posse of them here. Kiba Yudo is a demon, a former human in fact, reborn with the help of evil pieces. A race-changing artifact from this world? Interesting. Maybe Issei should take the form of some supreme being and try to steal those? A good idea, but Issei couldn't afford to be distracted by his passion for collecting now that he had a mission. Though maybe a little later? Issei thought for a moment before lightly touching Kiba Yudo's thoughts, trying to determine if he was a potential danger, an actor, or just another setting of this scene. A knight of Rias Gremory, his current level? Judging by his thoughts and memories, he is supposed to be well above the level of a new low-class demon. But still hasn't made his way to middle-class demon, so I would estimate his level to be about the 20th? Perhaps a little lower, although his ability to create swords. Oh mein Fata, that's not an ability, that's an artifact he possesses. Issei felt his interest slowly begin to take over as he discovered an artifact in his stroll. Sword Birth, another of these so-called sacred gear that Father mentioned earlier. The feeling I got makes it not nearly as strong as the world-class item, but it is still a unique artifact of this world, a member of a very high rank of artifacts. Though the swords he created are quite weak, but the tactical flexibility itself is magnificent. Further within his memories he was trained by Okita Soji? I'm not familiar with the name, but he looks like a strong enough opponent. However, in Yudo's memory he hasn't demonstrated anything really strong. In his training Okita would bring Kiba along to destroy him, stray devils? Another unfamiliar term? Still, judging by the monster's appearance, the one in the memory was about level 15. Even an opponent only 10 levels higher could easily deal with him, so it's not a good measuring stick of Okita's strength. Still, this is Yudo's thoughts, and Okita's strength was in no question to him as he was. Knight of Surzex Lucifer? He's the elder brother of Rias Gremory, and is supposed to be the strongest Satan. What strange information, isn't there supposed to be only one Satan, Lucifer? Are there multiple Satans in this world? What lovely information I've found. I wonder, what lies deeper within you, Yudo Kiba? With a silent smirk, Issei did find something exciting beneath all that memories and thoughts. Oh, sadistic experiments to create holy swords users. Issei nearly jumped from the emotions from Yudo at that memory, almost overwhelming him. The only surviving orphan at that. This is so cool. His real name is Isaiah, not Yudo Kiba. Great, unbelievable. So cool. Issei felt some exuberance as he began to penetrate the very center of Yudo's mind, half absorbed by the horizons that opened before him. Of course, the other half is still keeping vigil, no matter how intriguing this first demon he had found, choosing him as his target simply because he was nearest. All must be because of Father's will. And inside him? Oh my, what a struggle. Two raging streams of flame, two sparks trying to defeat each other, were raging inside Yudo. His loyalty to Rias Gremory, who saved him in his final moments, and his hatred for the Holy Church, for the very concept of a holy sword, a desire for revenge for all his slain comrades. The beings of the great tomb of Nazarik were bestowed by their grace with the knowledge of their purpose, their life purpose. Whether as a maid, or as floor guardians, while the people of this world were empty and meaningless, bereft of that purpose of which they were incapable of even realizing. And yet, even among these masses of empty vessels devoid of everything, there were those who tried to raise in their souls that great flame that burned in every inhabitant of the great tomb. They do so senselessly and yet commendably, capable of generating pathetic sparks from their own understanding of their purpose. Such a purpose existed inside Yudo. Yet Yudo Kiba was torn, for there were two of these sparks in his soul. Both of them insignificant compared to the great flame of a true servant of the 41, and yet real, tangible, and each of these sparks were tearing his soul apart. His colliding passion causing him great suffering. Issei could not imagine the terrible agony that Yudo must have felt, being torn between his two destinies. It would be a pain throughout his entire being, like the thorns of a rose sprouting through his flesh. And yet, just like a blooming rose, it was so beautiful and thrilling, a magnificent tragedy for those who wished to enjoy it. I see. A loud voice of a student interrupted Issei's musings, causing him to remember that he had a mission, and to turn away from the contemplation of the stunning specimen, turning away, hiding a slight expression of displeasure on his face. I know that look on your stupid face, you bastard. You almost drooled there just now, your eyes glistening. Did you get lucky with that Yuma yesterday, you bastard? The student who approached Issei had a shaved bald head, dressed in his school uniform, and was practically sobbing as he looked at Issei, Issei. Brother, we were abandoned to our cruel fate. Almost sobbing as hysterically as the first, dressed exactly the same as the first, with disheveled hair and large glasses covering at least half of his face. He seems to linger behind the first as he responded to his cry, torn between trying to be the more resilient of the two, and wanting to fall to the ground and tear up right on his way to school. Matsuda, Motohama, Issei easily picked up on the superficial thoughts of the schoolchildren, getting their name in relationship with Issei. If you mean yesterday about Yuma and me, then. Issei thought about what he should answer for a moment. Yuma, that was the name the fallen angel, Rainier, had introduced herself to Issei with. Issei was not fully aware of what had transpired between the fallen angel and Issei, but he did receive adequate information from Father as he prepared to go into this world. It seems that Issei had died after his date. More precisely, he should have died after Yuma Rainier's actions, but he was saved by Father, before becoming an unfortunate collateral of the fight between Father and the Red Dragons. Or perhaps it was intentional, considering all other actions that followed before and after what had transpired. The bottom line, however, was that the date between Issei and Yuma did not end in a way that the Issei could have simply told. Even if he had received permission to inform these people about the existence of magic, fallen angels, and, as could be understood from Yudo Kiba, demons and dragons, he had to play the role of Issei. And so, instead of answering, he merely picked up a superficial thought from the mind of one of the schoolchildren, then voiced that. It seems that Issei doesn't have the best of reputations with the fairer sex. It was all a prank. When I met her for the date, Yuma filmed me and then laughed and ran away. It was kind of a setup, or maybe she was forced to do it as a way to humiliate her. Moments later, Issei collapsed on his knees, after which he balled his fists and began striking the ground. The perfect pose to act out despair. I'm crushed, totally crushed. Shit, man. Matsuda, the bald guy, made his way over to Issei, then instantly knelt down beside him, putting a hand on his shoulder in a conciliatory gesture. Don't worry, I have some raunchy new mag on me, the best boobs, I'll give it to you for free. Dude, let's go to my place after class. I have so much new stuff and my parents have moved out of the house for the rest of the week. It'll cheer you up right away. Motohama, the young man with glasses, immediately got on the other side of Issei, showing his support of him. Issei, however, only noted that simultaneously with the real worry for Issei and his trampled love life and the friendly support and sympathy from the depths of the two schoolboys' minds, came relief. As if they feared that if Issei would get a girlfriend, bypassing them in life, and that by getting a girlfriend he would leave their perverted trio, which was once an offensive nickname that the trio of friends now proudly wore. Along with that, however, were considerable anger, both at Yuma for daring to wound Issei, and at themselves for being relieved to learn that Issei didn't actually have a girlfriend. Thank you guys. Issei rose from his stupor, then smiled sadly, wiping away a small tear that had appeared as he sucked in the air noisily. You two are real friends. No problems, bro. Matsuda gave Issei a friendly slight nudge on the shoulder as they began walking towards the school, causing Issei to note that Matsuda was in excellent physical shape, surpassing his supposed first level. Speaking of bros, Issei shook his head, acting out some kind of surprise. I think I found an older brother. Matsuda and Motohama, upon hearing this, instantly stopped their attempt to walk forward, shifting their attention back to Issei. "Issei, don't tell me you found someone you're willing to trade us for." "No, that's not what I mean." Issei shook his head. "I really did find my older brother. It turned out that my father had a family on the side, and the result of that relationship came here after his mother died trying to find his father. So to make matters short, mother kicked father out and now my sort of older brother lives with us." Matsuda and Motohama shifted their gaze to each other at these words, then back to Issei. And then, clearly not knowing what else they should have said somewhere along the way, just said the first thing that popped into their mind. "That sucks, brother." Matsuda spoke up first, briefly summarizing the news. Motohama only nodded at that, allowing Issei to frown and hang his shoulders. "Yeah." Matsuda and Motohama's thoughts swirled in their heads, regret mixed with some awkwardness and along with that, sadness, sympathy, and anger. Not only were Issei's dreams trampled yesterday, his father also turned out to be nothing like he had seemed all these years. "They really were good friends to you, Issei." Issei sighed mentally and outwardly to complete his act. "If that's any consolation for you in the afterlife, of course." Issei's attention was then drawn towards the direction of the school as more and more figures of schoolboys and schoolgirls, adults and youths, demons and humans with their emotions swirled in the distance. Issei smiled a little. Indeed, his father had prepared a great task for him, and at the same time, seemingly a dangerous one. It was a buffet full of viands and possibilities. Even just one Udokiba was already such a unique specimen, so what awaited Issei next? So many choices, so many wonderful, wonderful choices. Issei's gaze suddenly came upon the figure of father, and at the same time the figure of Issei's mother, Miki, walking lightly across the school grounds. Father's face expressed no emotion, while Miki seemed to be changing somewhat rapidly as she cast a slightly unfocused look around her, and at the same time looking at father ahead, now with apprehension and with respect. "Father, have you come here to see if I have done your will?" Issei smiled inwardly, feeling as if he were a child before the gaze of his parent, watching intently as the child wrote their first letters. "Father, such grace and mercy. Father, look at me, for I am now Issei Hayadu, and I am doing your bidding. Brothers, but you know exactly what will never betray us?" Issei? No, Pandora's actor who took that mask dissolved into it, and became Issei Hayadu until father said otherwise, smiled a smile full of pain, and at the same time an undercurrent of confidence. A moment later, Matsuda and Motohama smiled as they understood his message, and then, embracing together, they threw their arms up in the air with a loud shout. "Boobs!" A loud shout surprised Momonga, though the shame he felt was definitely not about the content of the shout, but who exactly was shouting. "I'm not listening, I'm not even looking, don't look at me, let no one see or notice me, I don't even know these people." Pandora's actor. "Why?" Momonga kept his gaze straight ahead, trying not to shift his eyes, running from the shame that rose so high that it dissipated after a moment. "I am so grateful for my abilities. If it weren't for them I would have run away by now using time stop and perfect unknowable liberally." Momonga took a few steps before he heard voices. Apparently someone was enraged by the shouts of schoolchildren, including Pandora's actors, posing as Issei at this moment, trying to quiet them. "I am grateful to you, whoever you are. I am very grateful." Stopping for a moment, Momonga waited for Miki to walk a little closer to him, as he had unconsciously hastened his steps as soon as he noticed Pandora's actor. "Ha, and why did I only copy Goru's documents?" As it turned out, Goru could indeed drive. A fact that was reflected in his driver's license, which Momonga had copied and not changed because he didn't know what that particular box on the card meant. So when Miki discovered this fact, and thanks to the fact that Goru had left his car as he ran off into the night without it, she offered to let Momonga drive. Momonga should compensate Goru somehow later for this loss. Momonga in turn reasoned that if he had a driver's license, it would be hard for him to find a reason not to get into a car, although he had never driven a car in the past world. In Yggdrasil, Momonga had used many different mounts, including mechanical ones. Even though he didn't have the special abilities of the cavalry classes, barring him from bonuses for fighting on horseback or driving a mount, he was still capable of using those. Therefore he decided to at least try himself as a driver. As it turned out, Momonga didn't know how to drive. Thankfully, he didn't crash into anything along the way, and as far as he could tell from the lack of police chasing him, he hadn't broken any traffic rules. At least, other than speeding. Momonga had forgotten that in Yggdrasil, mounts were used primarily for two things, either to move quickly from one location to another or during a battle to change positions quickly. Perhaps as an extra power in case the mounts were strong enough, or to activate the special abilities of players that required those like ramming. So when he got behind the steering wheel of the car, Momonga used it as he always did. He didn't pay any attention to the fact that the mounts, cars, of this world were not meant to be used at full speed, even if they had the ability to move quickly. The fact that he's accustomed to the speed of level 100 players, with the maximum speed of the car below a specialized level 40 mount, didn't help matters. His mind was simply used to processing things moving at a much greater speed. So Mickey, who was sitting in the front seat and had only time to buckle up, was instantly crushed by the speed of the bellowing beast of a car. A car which immediately burst with inhuman speed into the thick stream of cars on the road, and then rushed forward as Momonga maneuvered the car between offensively slow cars. Momonga didn't even pay attention to the strangled wheezes Mickey made beside him, as she tried to figure out what she was seeing in front of her eyes. Momonga ignored it all completely, considering what was happening as normal as it was in Yggdrasil, having covered the distance to Kuo Academy in literally minutes. After that, having easily parked with a 90-degree turn he had practiced in the past, adjusting for the car's comparative clumsiness of course, Momonga calmly stepped out of the car. While for Mickey she seemed to just flow out of her seat, like slime, barely finding the ground under her feet only because Momonga had put his arm up to her and waited another dozen minutes before she could regain her composure a bit. If it hadn't been for Momonga's buff-giving food a little earlier, it's likely that Mickey would have parted with the contents of her stomach by now. Something which made Momonga think of experiments. If the person who ate the buff-giving food expelled it from her body, would its effects end? What about the natural exit of that one from the body? Some high-level food could give extremely long-lasting buffs. What if the person went to the toilet earlier? Would the buff stop working or not? Momonga shoved those thoughts away again, after which he did lead Mickey to the headmaster, supporting her for a while as she couldn't walk on her own. And now, when she did seem to have found her legs, she still intermittently stopped to cast strange glances at Momonga, something that made him feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, Momonga knew that he well deserved the reaction. Momonga was faced with his child acting strangely as Mickey also was faced with the strange actions of her newfound son. I don't even know what's more embarrassing, when he salutes and speaks German, trying to do some ridiculous, cool, pose all the time, or now as he acts like Issei. Momonga couldn't help himself and put his palm to his face as if trying to hide from the world behind the barrier of his fingers. I don't even know what to do. Mickey, should I apologize for my son's actions or sympathize, because I know what it's like to have a shameful child? Momonga cast a glance at Mickey, who was looking at Pandora's actor, Issei. Or rather, at the trio of schoolchildren, at the moment seeking to escape from some girl with a wooden sword in her hands, running after the trio, threatening them with every possible punishment under the sun. Momonga turned his gaze to Mickey, wanting to convey his silent sympathy and understanding, but found on her face not what he himself was experiencing, but a strange detached expression, full of pain and recognition. Then Mickey shook her head and turned away, finding Momonga's gaze. Momonga sighed, then tried to silently convey a commiserating thought to her. Don't worry, I understand how you feel right now. It was unclear whether his thought had reached Mickey's mind, but she cheered up a little and then smiled a little, less sadly and without so much pain inside. Let's go, Mickey. Momonga nodded toward the nearby school administration building, noting that there were still 20 minutes left before classes began. If classes here began the same time as in his previous world, at least at 8:30. Mickey, taking a few steps forward, clearly strengthened and recovered from Momonga's trip, stopped for a moment, then smiled Momonga's way. You know, if you want, you can call me Mom. Mickey paused for a moment before giving herself a huge mental slap. Mickey, you're a stuffed-up, brainless fool. He just lost his mother just days ago, and you decided to just go ahead and suggest that he call you Mother? Just because he took care of you and Issei reminded you of Goru's behavior. You have no brains at all in your head, Mickey. You're an idiot. Umo. Satoru then looked at Mickey as if he was thinking for a second, most likely from shock as if to assess her, but before Mickey could apologize for her outburst, he only nodded slightly. Okay, Mom? Mickey blinked, as if trying to settle the words she heard in her head before nodding briefly, feeling uncomfortable with both her own actions and Satoru's reaction for agreeing to her proposal so easily. Though along with that came some joy at Satoru agreeing and calling her Mother, and the realization that it was not okay to easily call someone Mother after your own mother died just recently. Perhaps it was simply his way of dealing with the shock? Or was he actually not that close with his mother? Mickey lowered her gaze, unable to meet Satoru's gaze, then moved forward, making her way to the main building of Kuo Academy. Although, I don't know how his mother died and how he feels about it. The thought of my Suzuki, Goru's mistress, sparked deep anger in Miki's soul that clashed simultaneously with her empathy for Satoru, causing her mind to freeze in indecision. She hated my Suzuki as her husband's mistress. Ex-husband if she can help it. At the same time, she sympathized with Satoru for losing his mother. Satoru seemed to her a really kind, wonderful, caring young man, and Miki deeply felt sorry for his loss, but she could not let go of her hatred either. The dueling sentiments froze her in indecision, as if someone had stretched her mind into a single thin line and was now pulling at it from both sides, making Miki unsure of how to feel. But if he did call me mother? Was my abusive? Miki thought for a moment, and she could see the chain of logic forming. And well, if you think about it, emancipation is very rare, so, why he decided to take such an opportunity. No one seeks to become an adult early for nothing. And such recognition requires a court order that requires Satoru to be able to prove that he is capable of behaving as an independent member of society. And along with that driver's license, it didn't paint a pretty picture. Miki then paled slightly, remembering exactly how Satoru drove the car. No, judging by the fact that he managed to get to Kuo Academy in record time and without a single accident at that speed, he was indeed a first-class driver, but at the same time, he was, simply put, a death hazard on the road as he demonstrated driving skills that an ordinary person could not even dream of, at the same time disregarding all possible traffic rules. Probably Miki couldn't really tell. She was squeezed into the seat moments after Satoru got behind the wheel, and so she wasn't sure if he had broken any other traffic rules other than the speed limit. All the while she was trying to figure out if she was dead already. The flashing lights she could only see rushing toward her really looked like light at the end of the tunnel. At the very least, she did feel as if her soul were leaving her body, so the comparison seemed very apt to her. Still, the very fact that he could drive, albeit an obvious violation of speeding rules, meant that was how he learned how to do it. And, as Miki was still alive even after such a drive, then he had been practicing that way for a very long time. Which meant that he had gotten his driver's license a long time ago. Again, it doesn't paint a pretty picture. It takes people years to learn even to drive at ordinary speeds in the not very busy Kuo traffic. Even if Satoru was a genius chef and a genius driver at the same time, the kind that are born once in a generation and become legends, it would still take him years to learn to drive like that. And that, in turn, meant that Satoru had long ago become emancipated. Maybe even as early as 14, since that was the youngest age a court would recognize a child as ready to become an adult. But the question remained not how exactly he was recognized as an adult, but why he decided to do such a thing. Only a mature and well-balanced person could be emancipated, and the court would only grant such decision only on a dire need. In cases where the minor was in a dreadful living conditions, or perhaps seeking to escape from their family. Miki stumbled as her thoughts reached the very possible but deeply troubling conclusion. As she stopped to look behind her for Satoru, she found no one. Luckily, before she could panic, she immediately found Satoru already in front of her as they had reached the headmaster office's floor, with him waiting for her to catch up. As Miki looked at Satoru's worried face, she could feel her conjecture looking more and more probable. If that's so, that would explain why he doesn't seem to care at all about his mother's death. No, probably somewhere inside him he feels something about it. But, judging by his actions, he cared more about what happened to me and Goru yesterday than something as close and tragic as the death of his mother. He never once mentioned his past and easily agreed to my proposal. What if, in fact, he was not so much looking for his father as trying to escape from his mother? What if he really decided to find Goru not because he had no one else, but because he wanted no one else? If you think about it, it's possible. Miki felt like pulling on her clothes, a slight nervous tic showing always when she was heavily immersed in her thoughts. Goru never once visited Kyoto again after the first time, so Satoru's mother wasn't dating Goru anymore, and Satoru became a byproduct of their indiscretion. It is even possible that Goru decided to return home just because his mistress got pregnant, severing all ties with her, while his mistress decided to keep the child. And being the son of a single mother failed to give Satoru a proper childhood, while Mai failed to become a good mother. Perhaps after being abandoned by Goru, she neglected herself, after which Satoru simply had to grow up early and apply for emancipation. But, by getting his rights he also got the responsibilities of an adult, and he couldn't leave his mother so easily. Even though she gave him nothing maternal but birth itself, and after her death he tried to leave for another city, trying to find someone near and dear to him, the father he had never seen. Miki's heart was filled with pain toward a fellow woman being abandoned, Even if it's for her ex-husband's mistress, she did also just get abandoned by the same person even. The feeling of empathy, however, could not overpower her overflowing anger toward her too, but it was especially filled with pain toward the young man who had to grow up so quickly in such hellish conditions. A young man who, despite this, had managed not to squander his human feelings and qualities, and still remained a kind young man. A kind man who just wanted to find some warmth in this cruel world. He was looking for his father, but was ready to accept warmth from Mickey as well, easily agreeing even to call her his mother. Mickey's heart ached even more as the whole picture came together in her mind, causing her to stifle a rudimentary sob as she realized the situation before deciding to accept Satoru fully as her new son in her heart. Issei, I hope you get along with your big brother. The thought of Issei, on the other hand, suddenly resonated not only with a familiar love for her child, but also with a slight note of bitterness. Issei, you look so much like your father. In his youthful days, Goru was an even more open and perverted person than Issei, and in that respect, Issei clearly is Goru's son. Miki wasn't a shy girl herself. That was one of the reasons she and Goru had hit it off in the first place, but after all that had happened, it was hard and painful to see in Issei the habits of Goru as he had once been, and who, because of those habits, had ended up committing the greatest betrayal. Satoru clearly understood this as he constantly threw her a reassuring, sad, empathetic and understanding smile a little earlier as he watched Issei's actions. But there was nothing more Satoru himself could do. He clearly couldn't remake Issei's proclivities in one day, but Miki inwardly vowed to erase Goru's habits from Issei and prevent him from growing up to be like his father. Making his way up the 4th floor to the headmaster's office, Satoru paused slightly in front of the doors as he began looking around them carefully, clearly in a fit of nervousness. It took a while before, facing Mickey's reassuring smile and gaze, he stepped forward to open the doors and find himself in front of the headmaster. Mickey had only met the man a couple of times before. First, when she tried to get Issei into the school, and a couple of times when he'd called them to school after another of Issei's deeds. The headmaster was essentially a stranger to her. The headmaster was a fairly ordinary middle-aged man, with the fact that he's a foreigner the only notable thing about him. He's maybe a little older than Goru, or well, Mickey herself. His hair already starting to turn gray, gathered into a neat lacquered hairstyle on his head. He wore strict black-rimmed glasses and an expensive suit. The European looked more like a businessman than a school principal. Another notable thing about the headmaster is the unmistakable aura of power and strength he exudes causally. A rather unsuitable aura to have for the rather high, but not too high position he has in society. It was as if he had the ability to easily destroy the life of anyone who would only cross his path. Under the influence of this aura of power and strength, Miki unconsciously straightened her posture, while Satoru, who had seemingly easily overcome this aura, just took a step forward. Not paying attention to the strange look the headmaster was giving from under his glasses towards Satoru, he just began glancing at the various objects in the room. First, Satoru would look at the pen on the desk, then to the pile of papers on the desk, to the small mirror hanging on the wall behind the principal's desk, then to the principal himself. It was as if, only at that moment, did he notice the headmaster's presence. Still, surprise or not, Satoru stared at the headmaster straight in the eye, facing the man for a moment in a silent duel. Miki instantly felt an uncomfortable pressure building up in the room, as if she had found herself at a very heated negotiation between two power brokers quite by accident. Whatever it was that was happening, it seems that the headmaster conceded the battle, as he looked away first from Satoru and spoke first. "Good morning, Miss Hayadu, and you, Mr. Suzuki," Satoru replied calmly before bowing slightly, not low enough to show deference, but not so shallow as to show disregard and rudeness, demonstrating the perfect proficiency of his movements. It was as if he had done nothing but meet all sorts of bureaucrats and officials for decades. "Satoru Suzuki." "Good morning, headmaster." "Ah, good morning, headmaster." Miki followed soon after, the shock of Satoru's first meeting with the headmaster almost making her forget decorum. After a short exchange of words, Miki was able to raise her voice, thereby drawing the headmaster's attention back to herself, which suddenly became much less threatening than it had been just a moment ago. Some important things happened yesterday and I would like to help Satoru transfer to this school." "Is that so, Miss Hayadu?" The headmaster in a snap returned his attention to Satoru, his eyes searching for something that he couldn't find. "This is a rather unusual and unexpected request. Although I have nothing against transferring students, the school year has already begun, even if only a few days ago, and a transfer to this school requires passing exams." "I understand, Miki shook her head. But what happened? It's very unusual for me too. I am emancipated, Satoru finally spoke up, causing the headmaster to look in his direction again, this time with an upraised eyebrow. And I would like to study at this school, but because of my unexpected move to this town I was unable to prepare a complete list of all the necessary documents, and previous events prevented me from applying earlier. I am willing to complete any conditions for studying at this Umo-ko Academy. I would like to find out if it is possible. After Satoru's calm but impassioned words, the headmaster was deep in thought for a moment before nodding. Miki could feel her shoulder relaxing somewhat. A proper education is necessary for a proper life after all. Hopefully, living in a less stringent environment would be a healing period for Satoru. Of course, but first I would need your high school diploma and, your documents along with an approved application for emancipation. Forgive me if I cannot take your word so easily. Of course, Satoru nodded easily before Miki realized that Satoru had not brought any document bag or anything like that, before Satoru reached into the pouch of his jacket. It was a very prim and proper jacket, suitable as a school uniform, but honestly looking more like an office worker's uniform. For a moment, it seemed to Miki as if reality itself blinked suddenly. Perhaps for a split second, like a strange trick of the eye, it was as if Satoru had shifted a little by millimeters from his seat. And then with a magician's gesture and flourish he pulled several sheets of documents from his pocket, all bearing the necessary stamps and signatures, so that their veracity was not to be doubted. The headmaster took those, ran a glance over the documents and then smiled. I see no reason to stop you from studying at our academy. Satoru was as surprised as Miki by the headmaster's easy acceptance, but the headmaster only shook his head. Exams would just be a formality looking at your certificates. The headmaster turned his gaze to the grades from Satoru's emancipation certification, and Miki blinked in surprise. It seemed as if every subject a person could imagine was written in Satoru's certificate. Japanese, math, biology, alongside elective courses like photography and programming, and each of them had a grade beside it, exactly 100 points. Miki gasped in surprise a little. Where did Satoru come from? 100 in all subjects, and with the sheer number of subjects. It was just an inhuman level of academics. And what school could one find so many subjects to study? Did he go to an academy at Kyoto University? Only an institution like that would have had the means and resources to provide those subjects. Furthermore, to graduate early with 100 all those courses at one of the most prestigious schools at one of the most prestigious universities in Japan. Where does Satoru's abilities end? He was a super chef, a stunt driver, and now it turns out he was also a super genius, and all this while he was emancipated and single. That's the kind of person they should make movies about. I think our academy will be glad to have you in our ranks. The headmaster smiled at Satoru, then turned his gaze and began addressing the still shocked Miki. The first class starts in 15 minutes. I think you'll find a place in class 3A, you can get the uniform fitted later. Just like that. Mamanga inwardly sighed with relief as he looked into the director's eyes, and the magic of the headmaster seems to be casting. Though apparently it's not my grades after all, it's the fact that this guy couldn't get through my surveillance protection ring. I'm glad that I'm always prepared. It would be quite laughable for my disguise to fail just as soon as I started using it. Mamanga had a lot of racial and class passive skills. Most of them he had turned off a little earlier so as not to provoke mass deaths of random observers from his aura of despair or something similar. But some of them he never thought to turn off, like his passive skill, arcane sight. This ability allowed Mamanga to see through any form of magical concealment and invisibility, but did not work for some abilities not directly related to magic. For example, he was able to ignore even the ultimate spell of stealth, perfect unknowable, which even 100-level rangers could barely get through unless they were specialized in stealth neutralization and information gathering. On the other hand, he was incapable of ignoring stealth granted by the natural skills and special abilities of those same rangers if those skills were not considered spells, even if they happened to be available from level 1. Additionally, this passive ability allowed him to see through illusions, detect magical enchantments, magical creatures and intangible objects such as ethereal creatures. As well as that, he could see the effects of magic and the traces left by its application if the magic applied was strong enough and was applied recently. There were some ways to bypass or to block Mamanga's arcane sight, but in this case the opponent had to have special classes and abilities of specialized builds or creature types. The only problem was that, for all its good points, arcane sight did not allow Mamanga to determine the very type of enchantment or magic applied, or the level and direction of a magical creature's abilities. All the skill would tell him was only that the object was enchanted, or the creature had some magical abilities. So when Momonga suddenly discovered that the doors leading to the principal's office were enchanted, he had immediately stopped moving for a moment and prepared some countermeasures. The fact that magic existed in this world had already been known, so discovering a magical artifact, albeit in the form of doors, was not so strange to Momonga. The problem begins when he doesn't know the function of the magical doors, could be either a trap or a harmless artifact enchanted with something like silence, so that they would not slam or creak as they opened and closed. In Yggdrasil, permanent magical objects were created in a very different way, with data crystals, while the magic cast on objects was most often temporary, with some exceptions of course. But this world had already proven that there were unknown artifacts that did not fit within the normal logic of Yggdrasil. And so, as expected, as Momonga stood in front of the doors, he cast the spell, All Appraisal Magic Item. The spell fully reveals the item's properties and abilities, as well as how it was created, enchanted, its creator, and similar additional information. In retrospect, Momonga probably should have checked if the spell worked the same way earlier on the Longinus, the remnants of which he received after killing the red dragon. But by the time of this realization, Momonga had already given those to the Pandora actor, and so he simply had to check it another time. However, luckily the information from the artifact doors came to Momonga without any problems. As it turned out, these doors were a kind of emergency portal installed here and were made of something called hellwood. Its original construction was disguised by a layer of plain wood. When activated, anyone passing through would be deposited out in the location designated beforehand. In effect, it was a door that was enchanted by a spell that is similar to gate, with some limitation. The doors can only be used by a few specific users and only led to a predefined place, some place called Lilith. The artifact itself was enchanted, created by Seraphal Citra Leviathan and Serzex Gremory Lucifer, and was very, very strong. It had a built-in semblance of regeneration in case it was damaged, and automatically used weak information gathering magic on anyone passing through. In other words, if Momonga walked through those doors without the ring protecting him completely from information gathering magic, his automatic barrier to suppress surveillance would most likely activate, and the artifact would explode from his return spell. Another thing to add was that whoever was sitting in the principal's chair at the moment, they were clearly gathering information about everyone entering their office. Momonga had to rely on the effect of his ring and prepare for battle as soon as he crossed the threshold. Though he felt sorry for Mickey, he was ready to sacrifice her at any moment and give Pandora's actor the order to retreat immediately if anything goes wrong. A moment later, however, Momonga realized that Mickey was looking at him with a strange look, most likely having no idea why Momonga was frozen in front of the doors. So he cast aside his doubts, quickly made a fight plan in his head if a fight did happen, and as he opened the doors he took a resolute step inside. And, of course, instantly found himself face to face with a man that almost made Momonga cringe. He was almost a splitting image of his old bosses from the past world, except without the visible signs of cybernetic modifications. Sure enough, Momonga picked up instantly that the man's office contained several other artifacts. The pen on the desk was a transformed object, a staff originally, as his spell later explained to him, enchanted to take the form of a pen and transform back at the wearer's will. The pen/staff had been enchanted by someone called Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, and was comparatively not half bad of an artifact. It's not too high rank, but it still gives appreciable bonuses when used, enough to make Momonga to consider it to be a usable item if extremely niche in usage case. The stack of paper had a low-rank distraction illusion applied to it, preventing a casual observer from detecting the contents of the sheets themselves. The mirror had the ability to dispel the low-rank illusions of anyone who happened to be reflected in it. Momonga could only nod approvingly internally at the fact that the owner of this office had successfully hung a mirror that instantly reflected everyone who entered the office. He was also very glad that his create body was not an illusion. In addition, the mirror itself could use a strong enough attack spell, but only once. And lastly, the headmaster's glasses, also enchanted by a certain Agrippa, possesses basic information gathering abilities like mana essence and life essence, as well as identifying low-ranking illusions that fell into the man's gaze. Momonga could only be pleased that he wore his ring, currently transformed as his underwear, that concealed every information about his presence. And because attempting to remove his underwear was last on any list of priority actions for an enemy should a battle with Momonga begin, Momonga considered that one tidbit quite genius in his own option. Luckily also for Momonga, the artifact glasses did not have the ability to see the doppelganger's true form, but internally Momonga noted the need to inform the Pandora's actor soon to stay as far away from the director as possible, just in case. Lastly, but most importantly, Momonga had determined that the man sitting across from him had magical abilities, but he could not determine his level or his highest tier of magic. He could not even determine who exactly this man was. Was he this same Agrippa who made the enchanted items? Anyway, needless to say, Momonga's haunches were raised, and he had to struggle with himself not to silently start to cast some spells. So much so that he might act a bit wooden. However, luckily their dialogue about Momonga joining the academy went well without an outbreak of battle, even when Momonga himself had determined that the headmaster had already moved into the category of potential adversaries in his perception. Everything seemed to be able to resolve peacefully, until the moment when the headmaster demanded from Momonga his credentials. And of course, Momonga didn't have one. Emotion suppression activated several times in quick succession. He did, however, have an idea, an attempt which he was going to use that might work. And so, without making any sudden movements, Momonga raised his hand and put it inside his jacket's non-existent inside pocket, where there was nothing. And with a silent cast, Momonga cast Time Stop. An almost suicidal move that could mark the beginning of battle if the headmaster had any artifact that counters Time Stop. But Momonga's earlier observation made him confident enough to use the spell. Judging by the level of the artifacts, his opponent was not too strong, and therefore should not have protection against temporal spells, but Momonga was ready for his opponent's reaction, in case he reacted with hostility to his action. But, despite Momonga's paranoid self and his racing heart, the headmaster froze with the rest of the world. Quickly, Momonga leaped to action in the frozen time. First, he spent some precious seconds memorizing his original posture and position before the time stop. Next, he walked behind the headmaster's desk, and began perusing the documents on his desk to find something that he can fake as his credentials. Unluckily, Momonga didn't find anything useful, instead finding that these documents did not appear to be about the school at all, if the document title saying, Gremory Territory, and Lilith, meant anything. Wasn't the door linked to this Lilith? Momonga wanted to read more to sate his curiosity, but simply had no time. Luckily his next search was more fruitful, finding exactly what he was looking for, other people's certificates. Momonga quickly glanced through the documents and made his own appropriate copies. Unfortunately, he didn't know very well which subjects he was required to put on the list and which weren't, and which scores were the most realistic, so he did the only thing he could do. He copied all the information he could and then gave himself the maximum number of scores everywhere, 100, figuring this way he could attract attention, but no more than by his emancipation. It should reduce the risks of being rejected into the academy and requiring additional exams, which Momonga himself wasn't sure of passing. Fortunately, the certificates he found were written in Japanese, a language that he could write and understand. Momonga had already determined that he understood the local language by ear, but was a bit unsure whether the script would also be the same, something that he was happy to find to be true. Though, as it turned out, he understood more than just Japanese. It turned out that he understood at least some other languages, something he found out when he had visited another country at night, though he wasn't sure what country or what language the people were speaking. But other than finding that he could understand foreign languages now, he still couldn't parse the foreign writing, so finding the Japanese entries in the certificates made Momonga happy. Of course, Time Stop did not allow him to interact with other stopped creatures, but he was still able to interact with himself, either changing his equipment or placing buffs on himself, as well as with inanimate objects that were not associated with players were possible. For example, he could easily open the unlocked safe next to the director, take out the certificates, create his own copy and return them back. In Yggdrasil, players didn't specifically use Time Stop to read and forge documents, but if the opponent had no countermeasures against temporal abilities, it opened up a huge range of actions for other players. The examples were myriad: putting or refreshing buffs mid-fight, laying traps right in front of enemies, watching the next step of the opponent, or even changing their equipment completely. Or, as in this case, steal an item from under the guard's nose while fleeing away. That is why temporal defenses are the basic requirement for any player above level 70, without it, you'll just die instantly. Of course, the ability still has limitations, and it's impossible to stunlock an enemy by abusing Time Stop. First, being that the spell itself required a lot of mana, and any spell to be used needs to use the meta magic, Delay, increasing their mana usage. And lastly, and the thing that makes it almost impossible to pull off, was that one had to be incredibly precise in using each successive time stop. Momonga was one of the rare players who could implement this tactic without burning his mana for nothing, having studied and trained his abilities over the years of Yggdrasil. Not that he ever had the chance to use the strategy. Until now, he had never had the chance to do so. Until this moment, when he decided to vociferously burn his mana again, after it had finally almost fully recovered from the waste of killing the Great Red Dragon, using a spell of the 10th rank to forge documents. Momonga had to use time stop several times to fully copy the necessary documents before he returned to his seat, assuming the pose he had held before, to wait until the end of the spell. Of course, he quickly ran into another problem. His credentials were too amazing. Luckily, the problem was solved without him having to do anything, and he's now a student of Kuo Academy. The mana he had spent on the documents were very well spent. Documents that had ended up being his pass to the world of education. So, at the moment, he was in an extremely happy mood. He was ready to start his studies at the academy, even if he now had to be wary of the principal of the place along with some others. If his senses weren't fooled, he had seen a couple more holders of magic in this school. However, that's a concern for later. After all, what's the chance that the people he sensed earlier would be anywhere near him? The school is a very large place with many students and classes. And so, with nothing more to worry about, rejoicing inwardly, Momonga let Miki out of the principal's office first before following behind her. As Momonga was about to exit, his good mood died a quick death, tensing inwardly, almost flinching when he heard a quiet voice from behind him. "And where are your real documents, Satoru Suzuki?" Momonga almost froze when he heard those words, but with such outstanding credentials and having blocked all attempts to gather information, it would be foolish to expect himself to be above suspicion. But right now, almost any move he could make was a bad one. Miki was already behind the doors in front of him, and Momonga should have ended the conversation as quickly as possible. But by not giving away any information, even if he decided to play cool and say something like, "How did you know?" he would only confirm his opponent's possible assumption, since he might be bluffing, testing Momonga's honesty. "What do you mean, director?" So Momonga decided to play it as simply as possible, testing his opponent's hand. Nothing at all, and just as Momonga predicted, his opponent was bluffing. "I'm sorry, I haven't been sleeping much lately and I'm starting to talk to myself." "It's no problem, headmaster," Momonga smiled. "Have a good day, I think I should get to class." Johann Braun was an excellent wizard, and excellent wizards quickly rose through the ranks. That was why he's in the position he's in, the headmaster of Kuo Academy, a place where 2 heiresses study, a place regularly visited by 2 Satans alongside the head of 2 pillar houses. Johann was very high up in the hierarchy of his organization indeed. Coming from a rather old and venerable family of mages, he was trained for generations under the wing of the Grauzauberer, the Grey Wizards. Johann had shown himself to be a great man. He was talented, energetic, and even had some political weight in his circles. Even at his young age, he had already reached the rank of master, which mages usually reached only in their later years, when their hairs were gray. Perhaps befitting the name of their magic association, if they received it at all, of course. His growth potential, however, was not infinite, of course, and the next step up from his position, Magister, seemed a long and difficult road even for him, not to mention Archmage, the highest rank a mage could achieve. Well, theoretically there was the rank of Archmagister, above that, the position as head of his magic association. Sadly, this position has been held by Mephistopheles for centuries, the current and perhaps for a long time more leader of Grey Wizards. There was no chance of anyone else gaining that position, as he was what one would call a cheat existence. While all decent wizards learned magic as humans, Mephistopheles had learned magic as a demon, a race already possessing powers too high for wizards to compete with. Add human magic to his natural magic to that, and you get a cheater holding the mantle of Archimagister, 400s of years since the death of the founder and past head, Faust. Still, it's not like the Grey Wizards would complain much. It was Mephisto's action that started the integration of Grey Wizards with the demons, an act that had greatly benefited the association. And while such actions forced many mages to leave the association, founding their own instead, the good still balanced out the bad. After all, centuries of stories about dishonest tricksters who steal souls could not be undone by the fact that Mephisto himself was not a bad guy, who was genuinely into magic. Especially considering that demons could indeed steal souls and some even practiced it periodically even when the act was made illegal. Still, on the whole, the association's integration with the demons brought more positive things to the Grey Wizards, and to Johann in particular. The demons were very interested in the services of mages, and the mages were very interested in what they can pay with. Not always necessarily monetary compensation. The demons could provide magic materials that were difficult to find on Earth, patronage, or even their own knowledge. At the same time, the demons could closely monitor the progress of individual mages, selecting the most promising mages for the most important demons. While the mages themselves were given information about their potential employers, usually the information was even close enough to the truth. In other words, it was a fruitful cooperation in which the pros far outweighed the cons. At least from Johann's perspective. Many of the mages who left the organization refused to become the demons' lapdogs. Johann didn't see much of a problem with that, though. Many of the magic universities kept their own associate academies and schools with them, for roughly the same purposes that the demons kept their relations with the Grey Wizards. Was there anything wrong with that? In any case, Johann had quickly risen through the ranks, attracting the attention of the top Grey Wizards and, through them, the attention of powerful demons, so the invitation to serve one such demon was no surprise to him. The only thing that came as a slight surprise to him was who offered him the service. Xiaticus Gremory, one of the most powerful demons, father of the Crimson Lucifer himself, the current ruler of the underworld. One of the rulers that is considered also the strongest demon ever born in the world. It was rumored that he was stronger even than the original Lucifer. In other words, he was going to get a contract from a very powerful demon with enormous power and connections with no string attached. So, of course, Johann jumped at the chance given to him. The catch turned out to be that Johann should have questioned exactly why Xiaticus needed a mage. Usually, demons used mages to show the prestige of their family, to use them as their agents in places where demons themselves were lacking, sometimes as teachers or instructors as far as magic was concerned. If the demons for some reason wanted to learn, of course, or as teachers of everything human. Some lucky magicians were even reincarnated. For demons, recruiting magicians into their peerages was the easier option. First, magicians were close to the human world, but already knew about its magical side and would probably already be vetted for potential thoroughly beforehand. And second, they would not start praying the second they see a demon. Xiaticus Gremory, however, needed a mage for only one thing: to dump all his administrative work on him. Technically, Xiaticus was the administrator of Kuo Academy, overseeing both the school and its associated college, but he very rarely showed up to his workplace, preferring to go about his demonic business and dance around in his bloody camel costume. That man was willing to do anything but the school bureaucracy he was supposed to control. And so, of course, all Xiaticus' labors fell on the shoulders of Johann, who was put in as headmaster, as his officially contracted mage. He works alongside Elizabeth Rosenkreutz, who was officially contracted mage of the Citri family as headmaster of the college. If it weren't for the help of Sona Citri and her wonderful student council helping to sort out the school's affairs, Johann would have died of stress long ago, buried under a large pile of paperwork. Technically, Rias Gremory and her occult research club were also supposed to help with the running of Kuo Academy. But because of some quirk of their own, the demons had divided what they thought was fair in their duties. Sona helped with the running of the academy during the day, and Rias helped at night. There's only one problem with that arrangement though. Kuo Academy did not operate at night. Rias did occasionally help with the little things like securing the academy grounds at night with her team, but she did absolutely no paperwork. And Johann's concern was not any possible attacks on the school, but the endless attempts to get funding for new teachers, the old school building renovation, when it was abandoned when the academy moved into the new building, and finally build a normal dormitory for college students. Not everyone attending this school was connected to the demonic aristocracy, damn you, having virtually endless supplies of money. The ordinary students needed a dormitory too. Besides, who would be crazy enough to attack a school where two Satan sisters study? The constant numbers and reports seemed to be swirling in front of Johann's face. So when he sensed something unusual, he even rejoiced to be able to think no more about student lists and the annual budget revision. His joy, however, was short-lived. The doors that led to his study were enchanted by the bishop of Xiaticus Gremory himself, a very powerful wizard, Agrippa, in case of emergency. The door was to be used if it became necessary to drag Rias and Sona away from any danger, or if any other means of escape were blocked. At the same time, the door also served as an excellent defensive tool, since they identified the true nature of the creature entering through them. The door, perfectly relieving anxiety about agents and unknowns seeking to get close to the younger sisters of two of the four ruling Satans in the academy, at least as far as Johann himself knew. However, when someone else entered following Mickey Hayadu, an ordinary human as confirmed by the artifact's reaction, Johann instantly sounded the alarm. Agrippa was a powerful mage, but he wasn't too strong. On the world scale, there were many more extremely powerful creatures in this world. Some of them even preferred not to wave their power like a flag, but keeping it secret instead, balancing the strategic advantage of showing their power with the tactical advantage of hiding it. Even Johann himself, if he tried very hard and prepared himself, could probably fool the artifact. However, Johann was helped immensely by the fact that he knew about the artifact in the first place. A fact that random people should not know. Agrippa had hidden the enchanted hellwood inside the door, behind a layer of ordinary wood, and had made it so that it was not easy to sense the magic of the door. It was possible to do it, but at a glance? This wasn't just the level of high-class demons, but quite possibly an ultimate-class demons, and Johann preferred not even to look at such creatures for fear of their capabilities. Of course, he was technically under the patronage of Zeoticus, who, for his many downsides, would not leave his subordinates unprotected, but it would have done Johann no good if he returned to ash. Even the evil pieces had their limitations. They could not resurrect a person from a pile of ashes, requiring a relatively whole body, and that's if Zeoticus even decided to rebirth Johann into a demon. If Zeoticus could do it at all in the first place. It's possible that Agrippa might well have costed two of the lords, bishops. So Johann would really hate to die for nothing. The reason for him panicking so much? There was nothing, no information. The doors didn't work whatsoever, and Johann saw nothing in his glasses. Glasses that were supposed to determine the level of magical energy in the target. The mirror also couldn't dispel any illusion, if it was an illusion and not something else. And this person, who Johann had met for the first time, wanted to enroll, even after the school year had already begun. He was also the perfect student. Judging by his age and grades, 100 points for every school subject imaginable. He also did not exude any supernatural presence whatsoever, the perfect shoo-in for Kuo Academy. That is, if not for the fact that it's the same school where two younger sisters of two ruling Satans were studying, completely by chance. Of course, there was a slim chance that it was all just a coincidence. Some magic that was placed on the young man without his knowledge, or perhaps he might even possess some sacred gear with surveillance blocking capabilities. Given how many such students there were at this school, Johann would not even be surprised that he stumbled upon another one by pure chance, as if something was pulling people with sacred gears to this academy. However, the boy, who introduced himself as Satoru, had unmistakably glanced at all the magical objects in the study, including a folder of reports from Lord Gremory, something which had a good distraction spell on them. And then he had provided Johann with his education certificate, signed by Johann himself. His certificate was signed by Johann as the principal, with the same signature even. And Johann was pretty sure that he was not the principal of Kyoto Academy. It could have been a completely random mistake on Satoru's part when he had forged the documents, or it could have been a conscious move, a hint even, "I'll get into this school whether you like it or not. Your signature is already on my paperwork, so why shouldn't it be on my application?" And Johann didn't know at all what he was to do or think about this. He had to think quickly on the fly, and the only thing that came to his mind was to send him to school lessons, to get more time for him to look at him more closely. And, of course, to inform Zeoticus Gremory about what had happened immediately. His daughter was studying here, and if something unpleasant happened afterwards, Zeoticus would simply and without any hesitation remove Johann's head off his shoulders, and would in fact be absolutely in the right about it. The least said about what the Lucifer would do to him, the better. So after trying to provoke Satoru for a moment at the end of their meeting and not getting any meaningful response from him, it showed that Satoru knows of the other side of the world, the supernatural side. Johann could only sigh as he set aside the newly obtained certificate, taking out his phone and getting ready to dial his boss number on it. Johann hated doing paperwork, but in this situation he would really prefer to do just that. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Support the writer. Don't forget to like, sub, share, and donate for more videos.